Welcome back to Derry Public Radio. Reporting from the basement of the Derry Civic Center, this is CM Alexander with the news. In world news, revolution rages in South America as rebel forces attack the city. Early reports have named the chief minister of information and popular TV news weatherman, Escobar, among the casualties. Government officials say Escobar was assassinated in his green room ahead of the evening's newscast. You're listening to Derry Public Radio. This is Derry Public Radio.
Welcome back to Derry Public Radio, a bi-weekly Stephen King Book Club podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Joshua Kahn, alongside CM Alexander.
Hello, everyone.
And joining us, the co-host of Kingsize, Simon Balcon. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so nice to have you after you had us over on Kingsize for Survivor Type. It's nice that we finally got time to get back together.
Yes, long overdue, but we got there in the end.
And today we are covering the story In the Deathroom from Everything's Eventual with CM leading our discussion. CM, take it away.
Thanks, Josh. Simon, before we dive into In the Deathroom, I'd like our listeners, if they haven't heard your podcast, to get to know you a little better. And I have two extremely important questions for you. If you don't answer these to our satisfaction, very subjective criteria here, we might have to put you in the death room.
Oh!
So now you know the stakes. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, they're fun questions, I promise. So can you tell us what your introduction to Stephen King was?
My introduction to Stephen King was reading Skeleton Crew. When I was about 13 or 14, I think, some friends of mine at school had been very proudly showing off their copies of It, and they were well into that. It just looked like too long and heavy a novel for me. Yeah, I was a bit lazy in those days when it came to reading, and it wasn't just the content that terrified me, it was the size of the book. I thought there's got to be an easier way in than this. I know he does short stories, and somebody else recommended Skeleton Crew. So the first story of his I ever read was The Mist.
Oh, so good.
Yes.
Yeah. Great way in, I thought.
Yeah, it is.
I love that this was almost like a rite of passage for you guys. Like you're bragging about Stephen King books you're reading. That's cool.
That is great.
That's the way it should be.
And you did finally get around to It.
Oh,
so
yes.
Yes. That's great. You made it there eventually.
All right, doing good so far. Next question. Do you have a Stephen King moment from any of his work? Could be a book, short story, or adaptation.
Well, the first time I read it, I finally got round to it in what must have been my late 20s. And I was doing a sort of residential week looking after, or helping to look after and run a Buddhist centre just outside of London. And you stayed there for the whole week. There was a group of 7 of you to sort of help out running the place. And you shared a room. And on the first night, it became quite apparent that my roommate could snore for England. And I was not getting any sleep. So the next morning, I said to one of the people that sort of run the place full time, "Look, I'm going to need my own space." And he put me in this flat, this sort of downstairs flat, which was just me. And as I say, I was reading it, and I had a bit of a read the next night before I hit the hay, and I'm not exactly proud to admit this, but I was scared to turn the lights off.
Awesome.
That's terrific.
Yeah, but, a man in his late 20s, early 30s, and I should be able to, but I couldn't. It was a Pennywise section. In fairness, it was a Pennywise section. Yeah. And I could not sleep with the lights off that night. And I think that's one of the earliest as well, I think, sort of moments that made me sort of go, my God, this writing can really do something. If it can make me that flipping scared at the tender age of, 28 or whatever, then there's something in this. That's powerful writing, and it's not always, and writing can't always do that to me.
Yeah. That's so great. The mix of that horror with also that uncertainty of, sleeping in an unfamiliar place. It creates that perfect storm for nightmares.
Yeah. It didn't help. You're right. It's an unfamiliar place. Oh, and I'm sleeping down there on my own.
Yeah.
And I was like, be careful what you wish for. I've suddenly got my own space. And you know what? I think I'll take the snoring.
Yeah, that would probably be better. Your vulnerability has touched us. Josh is putting the cloth back over the device. I guess you're that guy.
Yep.
I'm unlocking the door. I guess I'm that guy. And you're safe.
Thank you. Can I have a cigarette now?
Yes. Just don't put it out in my eye. Okay.
I'd rather put it out in my eye.
Are you guys ready for In the Death Room?
I'm so excited to talk about In the Death Room.
This story starts with our main character, Fletcher, a New York Times reporter, having been captured by a South American dictator / weatherman and his crew.
Full stop. Before we go any further.
Oh, gosh.
Am I the only one who laughed out loud at the announcement that this dictator is the weatherman? That killed me.
It's endearing.
No, I don't think you are.
It's so funny. I love it.
So he is going to be interrogated about his support of an insurgency. And in the very first paragraph, we get a simple yet very upsetting description of what this room looks like, telling us everything we need to know about the hopelessness of Fletcher's situation. Would one of you like to paint our listeners a word picture about what this room is?
Sure. It is fairly sterile. It is to what Fletcher believes almost immediately soundproofed. And it is him with a chair in the room, a trolley with a drape over it, and a table with 3 people sitting on one side and the armed guard behind him. It is very bleak from the start.
Mm.
Yeah, he describes the walls are like this gray sort of bland looking tile with really dark stains on them.
Yeah, the maroon patches that he sees around. I forgot about that entirely. So gross.
Yeah.
Everything's gray and bloody. Cages, lights with cages over them, just not a place that you would want to be. So he has been kidnapped and he has had his ass kicked, but he's aware of his surroundings, although he's going to play it more dazed and disoriented than he actually is. And he is immediately doing things to increase his chances of survival, all the while thinking about how there's no possible way that he's going to be able to get out of this situation.
I really like that Fletcher, from the very beginning, you get this idea that he's smart enough to keep the show going on, because he keeps saying, like, I am freaking out, but I'm not freaking out as much as I'm throwing my body around. I want them to think I'm full-blown panic, can't think straight. And just that little bit tells you so much about who Fletcher is. Like, the resiliency of him, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought he did much better than I would in that situation.
Same.
Yeah, to be able to keep his wits about him, as you say, and to sort of start to put on this performance, which he hopes like hell is going to fool them. And he's quite worried that it doesn't fool the woman in the room.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I'm going to completely derail us for a minute. I have to go off on this side tangent. I hope you'll both join me.
I can't wait.
It's really hard not to talk about every single thought that Fletcher has, because the story is full of juxtaposition. Throughout it, he's thinking about, on one hand, how hopeless this is, but everything he does then to increase his chances of escape. And he's this reporter who'd never hurt or kill anyone, and he knows that if he does leave, it'll be because the 4 other people in this room are dead. And the whole cigarette thing later, which we'll get to talk about, but the dichotomy of him telling himself it's hopeless, he's dead, and his actions to escape, also reflecting his captor's promises that they're going to let him go if he cooperates, yet they're in the death room, which is not being referred to as the recovery room. And I know I'm not saying anything profound. I'm basically like, hey guys, guess what? Stephen King writes good. But it's these literary elements stand out to me in this short story specifically in a way that, I know he does this in most of his other work, but it really makes the story much more interesting to me and clips along at a really good pace for something that I personally would not be drawn to this type of story.
You're not an interrogation kind of person.
And no, I want like sci-fi and horror.
Fair,
This is
yeah.
just too
straightforward.
straightforward. Yeah.
We'll get to it a little bit later, but at one point Fletcher talks about the personalities he discovers inside himself. What is it? Mr. Maybe They Will and Mr. Even If I Do.
And maybe I can. There's
maybe I can shows up later. But those, you're exactly right. The juxtaposition between kind of which one of those personalities is taking over at the time is either hopeful or I have to kill everyone in this room.
Yeah, somebody's being carried out of here. One or other people.
So Simon, you'd read this before, or was this your first time?
No. This
okay.
I had read this before, but years ago. So the recent reread was there were quite some years in between the two.
So this is my first time reading it. I've seen 2 different Dollar Baby adaptations of it, but this is my first time reading it. And CM, is this your first time reading it, or had you read it?
Yes, my first time.
What did you guys think the end of the outcome was going to be when he comes into this room? Did you think this story ends with him getting out or him never leaving?
Yeah, not a chance. I didn't think he was getting out at all. It was quite a surprising ending, really, given how everything that come before it and how 1984 it feels.
Yeah. That's exactly the vibe.
It's King says at the end, it's Kafka-esque, which I have a question for you guys specifically about the end. At the end.
Good place for that question.
I say,
I was like, why not throw it in now? But you want to keep the ending for the ending.
Yeah.
I get off the rails, but I try not to get that off the rails. Okay, so reflecting kind of what we were just talking about with sort of the dichotomy of this story, and I promise I will try really hard not to continue to point out every instance of this, every other line. But the guard, he plops Fletcher down in the chair in front of the table. And since he's playing into being hurt, he nearly falls. And the man that we come to know very shortly as Escobar is like, careful, that's not how we do things in the recovery room. And okay, I know I said I'd stop, but I apparently lied instantly. Throughout his interrogation, Fletcher thinks about his sister, which we can describe more fully as we get there. But it's, again, this imagery surrounding his sister is either it's more serene or happy, which his situation obviously isn't, but we'll eventually discover neither is hers. But until you come to understand at the end what ultimately got him where he's at, you could easily interpret these few moments as his attempts to focus himself with thoughts of happier times or center himself. And it's just crazy. I love like all the ways our expectations are played with from the instant he gets in this room. What did you guys, did you have any sense or impression of what these moments with his sister were?
Well, it helped me get a better sense of what Fletcher's stake is in this, because at the beginning of the story, when he's in this room, he's a journalist, and he's obviously got himself into trouble in this South American country. But to begin with, I thought, that's just awfully bad luck. I think he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he was trying to get a good story. And he wanted to obviously tell it from the point of view of the revolutionaries. And so he probably thought he was doing the right thing. And I think he probably does. But it's only when you get those nuggets of information about his sister that I started to feel that there was something more personal driving this along for him.
What about you, Josh? Did you pick up on that?
I did not at first. I did think that it was just the escapism, because it's just he's imagining his sister in this unnamed stream in this idyllic area of South America, and it's so different from the situation he's in. So I thought about like that escape. And then, as it goes on and we get it's not quite unreliable narrator, but it's a little bit, because at the beginning, like you said, it starts out with being like, I'm a journalist. And he is. But we find out later he hasn't been for like a year now. Like, so it's crazy the way the layers of when the story starts, it is a journalist being held hostage by a hostile government. And as the story goes, you start being like, oh, he's so much more involved than I thought he was.
Way more to
No
this,
wonder they at first it's like, why would they grab him? And then it's like, oh, duh, that's why they got him.
Yeah, and I saw the Dollar Babies first, and in the visual format, they structure the story a little bit differently, and they're so well done.
They
They're both
are.
amazing. But I was reflecting, like, would I have fallen for this? And I can't say, but I feel like I would have. I would have just thought that and not really read anything into it. And I think I would have been surprised when the reveal happened. So Simon, you point to Simon for picking up on something interesting beyond what we're given happening with why he's here and what he's doing. And since we are like literally a page into the story at this point, you guys, please save me from myself and tell us about the other people in the room. Describe Fletcher's 3 other companions.
Well, he does a great job of painting the woman in the room.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good shorthand for her. Elsa Lanchester, the bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah,
not just Elsa Lanchester, because it took me decades for this penny to drop. But Elsa Lanchester, who played the bride of Frankenstein, also plays the nanny who walks out at the beginning of Mary Poppins.
Are you serious?
Yes. As Mrs. Banks is coming home, the nanny of that week or whatever is had enough, and she's walking out the door. And that's Elsa Lanchester.
That's amazing. Now I'm just seeing that woman as the woman in the room in her nanny garb.
Well, she does try to walk out of the room later.
She sure does. She sure gives it a shot. The woman was definitely an interesting thing for me because I expected everybody else gets a name. She's the only one who never gets a name. Because
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, because I made the space in my notes because there's the woman in the room who's, correct me if I'm wrong, they said she looks like she's in her 60s.
Older woman.
An older woman. And then there's Hines, who is a tall, thin man, and Ramon, who's the guard.
Hines is the doctor.
Or Hines is the doctor. Well, we don't know he's the doctor yet, but he's the torturer and Escobar. Mm-hmm. But I was constantly waiting. I had like an open space in my notes to write down the woman's name when we got it. And I wasn't until after that I was like, oh, we never find out who this woman is, what power she actually holds. Like, the implications of the spoiler alert when she dies, I'm very curious the ramifications for what she was in this government, in this structure, and we'll never get any of it, and I love it.
Yeah, I was going to ask what you guys thought about his assessment of the Bride of Frankenstein, who in his mind, he initially thought, like, she moves up the ladder from probably being Escobar's assistant to probably actually being the guy in charge.
It's smart.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but as you said earlier, I mean, the fact that Escobar is also the weatherman doesn't really give him as much gravitas.
It does,
as
Minister of Information is definitely the better title.
It undermines his
weatherman.
authority in a way, because to me, like, the way he's described as just this jovial weatherman was endearing in a way. I was like, I'd watch him talk about the weather.
It's definitely a setup for Escobar is the charm. Escobar's the face. Escobar is the person that this woman who's the power behind the throne wants his face in front of everything so she can work in the shadows.
Yeah.
And it's never, like, none of this information is ever given to us. I just love that you get to piece out the structure. You get to piece it along right with Fletcher as he figures out the relationship with all these people.
They're talking about whether or not they're going to handcuff him. And as this is happening, he's reflecting on who this woman is. And he has this image again of his sister. And he's focusing on these images of the bride and his sister and the light on the river. And he's thinking, I just want to throw this line out there because I thought it was really beautiful. He's thinking that he wants images, not ideas, because images were luxury items and ideas were no good in a place like this. In a place like this, all you got were the wrong ideas.
I fucking love it. Such good writing. Jesus.
And it goes with what he ends up like internally, this division of all these different versions that he goes through, which I didn't realize at the time, but it's kind of like, what does that poetic line even mean?
Any thought that is not, from here on out, any thought that is not about my direct survival is a waste of my energy. And it really, man, I know I said it like 3 times already this episode, but it defines Fletcher so clearly.
Yeah.
His drive, his inner strength, you just get all that resolve from him so right away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The second he sort of makes that decision or identifies that, as you say, so I've got to focus on the task in hand, because this is literally life or death. It's fight or flight, and I'm not going anywhere, so I might as well go down fighting, and I'm going to try and sort of see if I can give them a few lies and see if that will satisfy them. But of course, it doesn't. So he's going to have to dig in quite literally.
And he's put in like such a difficult position, because so Escobar's like, we don't need handcuffs, our friend here is going to be leaving soon. He's going to go back to America. He's our guest, not our prisoner. In fact, hey, Fletcher, would you like a cigarette? Which I love what he does with the cigarette, because you don't know either at first. He gives you a clue, but do you guys want to talk about this cigarette thing?
What about it exactly? Like that it's the cigarettes are Chekhov's gun.
He's already like thinking ahead about he reaches for it.
Oh yeah,
just so they can see his hand shaking to kind of play into that.
Yeah.
I'm less okay than I appear. And he's thinking about like, oh man, I stopped smoking several years ago, but if I do make it out of this, which I won't because it's hopeless, but if I do, I'm going to buy a pack of cigarettes. I'm going to go to this place in New York and I'm going to get a pack and I'm going to start smoking again. And he declines the cigarette at that time, and that's going to keep coming up.
This reveal that, the fingers shaking so they can see it, it's from that point on that we've had these details of him exaggerating how he acts and showing his finger shake. And you're like, wow, he is kind of prepared for this. Mm-hmm. And then you get kind of this info dump that you find out he's been here for 5 years. He's been living in this country for 5 years. And then that's when it drops he stopped being a reporter 16 months ago. Mm-hmm. And you're like, dude, what is your life?
Happened to you?
Yeah. Also, I love that. I mean, this is very probably American of me, or maybe knowing the opinion of Americans in other countries. But the idea that they speak Spanish in front of him and he's lived there for 5 years. I'm like, you really think he hasn't picked up enough? Or is this very intentional? You want him to hear what you say?
See, I think everything they did, maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I think everything they did was completely intentional, because there's a part, like we talked about Escobar not being as intimidating as maybe he wants to come off as, but there's a part here that did make me terrified of him. And it's when he's not quite apologizing to Fletcher for the treatment that he's received. And he's like, the guys that beat you up, they're not in trouble exactly, but they've been mildly reprimanded because they didn't do anything wrong after all. They were just doing their jobs, which is like, I became very afraid of this guy at that moment, because I'm not sure what the word that I'm looking for is. It's more sophisticated than manipulative, I think, but it illustrates what his leadership is like. If he can excuse any bad behavior in that way because it's in the name of, quote, service, that's extremely scary, because a person like that can justify every action they take in a way that you can't argue with that kind of absurd logic. So, like, I guess he's just a politician, but
man's a dictator.
That's not at all unusual for politicians, I think.
So Escobar and his guard, Josh, as you were saying, they kind of put on this, what I thought was a show for Fletcher, with this conversation in Spanish that he obviously understands, although he doesn't quite pick up all the words. He picks up the gist of it, about how his stuff is packed and ready, and there's a car and his passport, and everything's going to be fine. And Bride of Frankenstein explains, you're not going to be killed or harmed. You are going to answer some questions. And then, you sided with the wrong folks, so we got to kick you out of the country. So sorry. But that's as bad as it's going to get. And that's kind of when we get more of that information about him not being a reporter for the last 16 months, basically when he first met Nunez. So now the questions come. Let's talk about the information he provides, where he lies. And that's when these two versions of himself, as he's grappling with all of this, Escobar begins interrogating him and promising him that the truth is going to set him free. It's
tense because we don't get a ton about this revolution, because Fletcher is staying very tight-lipped and he's really going to be our main resource. And he knows that the information he has is the only thing keeping him alive right now. So we find out that Fletcher has been an informant to Thomas Herrera, who was giving information to Nunez being the leader of this revolution. And before they start asking him, is it before they start asking him that they show the picture?
They ask him how long he's been here doing this, and he tells the truth. He actually says, it's actually a little longer than you guys believe. And they offer him a cigarette again, and he says no. And then they open a folder with a picture in it. Simon, what did you think about what's in that folder?
Well, it explains not how he got there, but it explains why he's there.
Yeah.
Because Thomas is dead, and if they'd gotten the information they needed from him, they wouldn't have needed to pick up Fletcher.
Mm-hmm.
So it also raises the stakes a little bit more for Fletcher, because now he knows that Thomas is dead. Doesn't he also know somehow that Thomas didn't live for very long during the interrogation? He died quite quickly.
Yeah, because there's a mark on his head.
A burn on his temple.
Yes,
he had a seizure, didn't he?
Yeah, so they explain to him, that's when they reveal what's underneath the cloth on the table, and they're explaining, we used this on him, but we didn't really use it to even half strength. And you're not epileptic, are you?
That shit is insane. The reveal of this electrocution torture device. And it's so weird. It's so basic in my mind's eye. It looks so weirdly Frankenstein. But the important thing is that the main thing is the steel rod that this machine's plugged into that is where all the electric current comes through.
And Hines, the doctor, is so proud and excited to reveal this.
Oh, yes. This is a real work of art for him.
Yes. He's explaining it's not that it's painful, but people find it extremely aversive. And it can go places, it can go anywhere. So then after this, it becomes the dildo, which I'm like, oh my God.
That's just what it was for you the rest of the time?
No, he describes it as a dildo.
Well, he just
That's
says
not me. You don't put that on me.
Does he actually say dildo?
Is it?
In the story. That's funny.
Josh.
Nice try, Josh. Nice try.
I was still, maybe it's because I was still so horrified with the idea of it's not the pain. People are just have an aversion to the process. What the fuck does that mean? That's so scary.
That is so upsetting. Like I can't even.
It's one of those things that's terrifyingly vague.
When he talks about it being able to be like, put up your butt, and he says, a man whose shit has been electrified never forgets it. And I clenched real hard.
Yeah. It's one of those things that, makes you sort of do exactly what you just said and cross your legs or sort of bring yourself in a bit sort of tight like this and a bit of a shudder there.
And it's this combined with the torture device in the room. We have Tomas's photo of his corpse, and Fletcher. That's the moment that it sinks in. Fletcher's all alone. Mm-hmm. He knows the revolution's coming, but it's still maybe at minimum a full day away. And there's no way he's staying here a full day. And I just love the way that this whole moment now finally brings it to it's 100% on me.
And this is why I kept thinking that everything these individuals are doing was so intentional from the start, because they give him this softball question, like an easy one to just tell the truth on. And then they show him the picture, they show him the machine. Now that he knows the stakes, the real questions are coming. And he knows that these are the questions Thomas died for, the questions that he wouldn't answer. And he's offered another smoke, and he says no.
I'd also like to point out that not only is Fletcher an informant with Tomas, but he mentions he has had cereal with his kids watching cartoons. He's had dinner with their family. He is not just an informant. He is a close friend to this person. You get that connection.
And he does not react.
Yeah, he doesn't give him shit.
No, but he does start answering questions.
They ask about what Nunez's plans are for, like, is he going to take the radio station, or is he going to attack the city? Does he have rockets? Things like that. And it's very fun with the Fletcher will answer, and then his internal monologue is like, yeah, that's kind of true.
Yeah, the way it's written is cool.
Yeah, it's like, he's going to go for the city first. oh, that's a lie. He's for sure going to go for the radio station. Like, all this stuff that you get that internal, he's giving them something, but he's refusing to betray his allies, and that is a mistake.
Yeah, and I love that he's like, because they're like, oh, he's not going for the TV station or the radio station. And he's like, no, he said something like, let them babble, which sounds like such a plausible thing.
Yeah.
That is like, ooh, he's going to get away with this lie. And, said that they do not have rockets. He lied about that. Or they didn't, yeah. And this is where things take a turn because Bride whispers, and she does it in a way, she doesn't even cover her mouth. She like does it without moving her mouth, which is terrifying too. But she whispers something to Escobar, and Fletcher knows that she knows he's lying. And this is where we really get that Mr. Maybe They Will guy and the Mr. Even If I Do guy. And then he invents the third guy, Mr. Maybe I Can guy. And I really like this Bride character because he realizes that they've asked him things they already know the answer to as if they don't. So they basically given him enough rope to hang himself, and he just fell right for it.
Yeah. Can I take us through the shock?
Yeah. What?
Holy
do
fuck.
it.
It's so awesome.
Describe the experience while it's still fresh, Josh.
You fucking got me.
Yes.
That's good. That's
Well,
real
good buzzing,
good.
if you will.
Oh God. So they give Hines the go ahead to give him the shock, and Fletcher immediately is like, I knew I wasn't getting out of here with at least one. So here's the one. And he fights it, and Ramon pulls his gun and shoves the barrel of the gun in his ear, which is just savage. And he holds him in place, and Hines takes the prod, turns it like a quarter of the way up, and touches it to the back of his hand, and he describes it as though the shock runs through his teeth. He feels it in every part of the inside of him. And I love that immediately he's like, Hines is right. I do not want to do that again. The pain is already fading. I do not want to go through that again.
He says he'd consider shooting his own mother before.
Yeah. Yes, he does, doesn't he? Yes.
Fucking insane. And then Hines, describe the experience while it's fresh in your mind. He's so fucking excited.
He's going to write a paper about it, you guys. He's got... Okay, I
I can't wait to read
unfortunately
it.
kind of relate to him here. You'd want to, you'd want to investigate this so that you can write a good paper about it.
You would?
Well, I mean, if it was something, I wouldn't do something torture and without consent. I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying I understand it. Move on, guys.
Okay, sorry.
We got a weird window into Sam's hobbies.
I was worried you were going all Count Rugen, man. Sort of, I'm hoping to provide the definitive work on the subject one day. Sure you will, but I won't be helping you.
Okay, I'm going to try to recover from that. But he does tell Hines, he's like, it feels like dying. And the dude's so excited about that. And he's trying to have a full-on discussion with what he's going to do with this information. And Bride of Frankenstein shuts him down. And Escobar's like, oh man, you failed our test. You got to start telling the truth now, because we're going to keep doing this until you give us what we want.
And then the questions get so specific.
Oh, yeah.
Sam, you're 100% right. It's very clear they knew exactly what they were doing every step of the way here, because everything was so general. Everything is such a false sense of security, getting him to play along. And now, these questions are about specific locations of where he was last seen. The woman even asks, who is it that Nunez talks to when he comes to the city? And Fletcher's like, I can't lie. There's literally no answer here, because they've already proven they know so much. They're like, it's such, when that question comes out and he freezes for the first time, so scary, man. You think it's all over. And
that question ends the interrogation before we talk about the amazing thing that he does next. I wanted to talk about this and I skipped over it, unfortunately, but I thought it was so cool, so fascinating. When they're telling him these lies, it's before the first shock, he wants he knows that he's going to want to believe them as things get worse and worse. Even though he knows better, even though he walks in there from the second he gets in that room, he doesn't walk in there, he gets drugged in there. From the second he enters that room, he knows it's bad. And he keeps telling himself, and that's why he comes up with these 3 different guys, keeps telling himself, like, you can't allow yourself to believe their lies. You are not getting out of this. They're not going to let you go no matter what you do.
Simon,
yeah, they've got nothing to lose.
Remind me, when was the last time you were held hostage and interrogated?
Metaphorically speaking, last night.
Actually, I feel like metaphorically speaking, the start of this episode.
Well, yes, actually.
That's also very true.
What are we thinking?
Like 40 minutes
About 45 minutes ago, this one started.
We treat our guests so well.
We do.
I'm curious. So this question, before we get into the end, I'm curious on both of your takes on where you thought, if you can remember, I guess, in that first experience, where you thought it was going from this kind of pivotal moment, or like where this moment left you, I guess. Because for me, it was real high anxiety when he realizes that no safe answer part.
I still didn't see him getting out of it.
Yeah.
I thought he would put up a good fight. I thought what might happen is that he would overcome everybody in the room, perhaps, and he'd get out the door, and then he'd just be faced with a platoon of guards that would shoot him dead in the
That is a very plausible ending to the story.
I thought the exact same thing. I agree with Simon. That's what I thought was going to happen. And we have another juxtaposition here, guys, which really struck me, because he knows now he has to act. He can't answer that question. He has to do something. And his heart is beating so slowly. And he's thinking about the last time he was in a very stressful situation. He was giving a speech and his heart was racing. And I don't know. So it's such a simple description, but something about it, just, it being so slow in this moment kind of freaked me out a little bit. It was a nice setup for what he's about to do, which, let's talk about. He starts to answer. He's like, oh, this guy, actually, you know what? Can I have that cigarette now?
Yeah. Simon, will you do the honors? Will you take us through this action scene once he has the cigarette?
Well, if memory serves, he gets a cigarette lit, and then I don't know did he have a fight with Ramon first, but it ends up in Ramon's eye, doesn't it?
Ramon lights the cigarette and he shoves it in his eye.
Jams it right into Ramon's eye. And if there's one detail about that incident that I remember, is that he's trying to get it out. And all he does is like take the filter off, and it's still stuck in his eye.
That's such an upsetting detail.
Poor Ramon probably gets it the worst out of any death in
No.
I feel like Hines was probably over pretty fast.
When we get to Hines, I have the description, like moment by moment.
Yeah.
So he grabs Ramon's gun as he's flailing.
Of course, so he needs the gun, doesn't he? Because he ends up firing that empty. Yep. Doesn't he run out of bullets?
He runs out. But
Ramon is flailing, so he's not worried about him at the moment, and he knows Escobar's coming at him, and he turns around, and he kicks a chair into him.
Yeah, it fucking rules. He kicks a chair into Escobar's path and then shoots Ramon in the top of the head, or he shoots Escobar in the top of the head, and the bullet comes out of his chin, and I was like, that fucking rules so hard.
Oh, and there's just that little detail about his hair sort of moving a little bit.
It's like it's a kill you'd see in John Wick, I feel like. It's so fucking cool.
And then Ramon is coming at him, and he fires one into his chest and then into his face, and that doesn't kill him. It's very gruesome. But I love how comedic this moment gets. Ramon trips over Escobar's body and goes down, and he grabs Fletcher's ankle, and he kicks his hand away and accidentally lets a round off into the ceiling as that's happening. Then he turns
and loses a shoe.
Yeah.
oh, darn! Oh, well, if that's the worst thing that happened to you this afternoon,
part of today,
he's doing pretty good. So he turns around and sees Bride at the door, and he makes his way over to her.
Man, when she starts just begging for her life at the door, and you see how different she is here versus when she was in control, I guarantee this was a bit.
Well,
I guarantee.
And how different he is, too, because the first two people he killed, and he's never killed anyone, too. We got to keep that in mind.
True.
That was survival. That was reactionary. It was fast. These next two are nothing but brutal revenge.
You know what? I'm going to change what I just said. I don't think that she is acting, because I wrote this line down, that's just this description because I loved it, that she's almost pushing herself through the door. That's how badly she wants to be out of this room. And that horror, I do not think can be faked. I think she really sees it. And I love that part of all this is when is it around here where he's acknowledging, well, okay, this must be soundproof because I've fired off like 4 shots and no one's come running. I love it.
Yeah.
So now he kind of knows he has the time.
Yeah, I love that detail of herself trying to push herself into this door so hard that it would sort of absorb her. And then she's sort of like, like the T-1000, just sort of go through it and come out the other side.
This is actually something I'm really excited to talk to you guys about. I want your takes on what he says right before he ends up killing the woman, because she is saying, I'm your only hope. If you spare me, I'll give you a bunch of money. We'll get out of here. I want your guys' take on thugs versus patriots. What did you guys think of that description? I thought that was
a very clever point that Stephen King was making here. That when the bottom line comes around, patriots make a speech and thugs just beg for their lives.
Fucking
That's a
beautiful.
very good point, isn't it?
Oh, I love it.
So, Simon, we were talking about Josh and I were kind of surprised. I feel like you more saw what was coming. Do you want to describe what we find out about the sister and how you felt about that moment here?
Well, that's the sort of the last reveal of information, isn't it? You had a sister. She died. I think it's mentioned before that she was a nun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hinted at.
But then when you found out that she was murdered quite brutally, and this is a horrible thing. The body was desecrated, essentially.
Yeah.
Beheaded, yeah. And he says...
And put on a spike.
He says, my sister was the one in the middle, and then shoots her.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter that Fletcher doesn't believe her in that, you can have all this money. I can get you out. I can get a passport. It's complete bluster, but it doesn't matter a damn thing, because the reason he's been in this country for as long as he has, and he's been helping this revolution, is because of this personal stake that he's got. And once you read that, he is definitely going to kill her.
Yeah.
So I think for me, because I mentioned I saw, Josh, you too, I saw the Dollar Baby films first. So reading this was not a surprise, the reveal with the sister. But I really do feel like, again, because you have to tell the story kind of slightly different when you are using a visual medium rather than text. And I feel like we get a little more sense of what's going on visually when that happens. And I was struck, even though I knew about I was struck by how much of a wow moment this would have been reading it for the first time. Just how powerful. And it's almost like one of those, you always want to say or do or even write something like real badass, just the perfect one-liner, zinger, or last words, and never really works out that way. And I feel like King pulled this moment off beautifully.
There's one thing that I will say, the thing that, even though I've seen the adaptation, the thing that really shocked me about Fletcher's motivation is that he, despite being here for the past 5 years, at this point he kind of says, I don't understand everything that's going on in this political climate. All I knew when I got here is that Nunez wasn't the person in charge when that happened to my sister, and that is what put me on his side. And that gave me such a kind of, hold on.
Well, because he's not undercover he's undercover. He's not there to report on something.
Right. It's the tunnel vision part of it that, because it was very extreme to know, okay, he's a journalist. He's been here for 5 years. He's been a revolutionary for 16 months. And then now we find out that this had to have been more than 5 years ago. You would presume he didn't come down here before that happened. And just realizing, imagine.
Yeah, this isn't an assignment.
Yeah, like the tunnel vision of acknowledging that at this point, he doesn't know whether Nunez is right or wrong for leadership of this country.
Care.
He does not care.
No.
And I think that true amount of revenge is so interesting to what we find out Fletcher's capable of doing. It really unlocks the last part of him for me.
Yeah, so powerful.
I think that's the moment after which he's never going to be the same.
100%. Yeah.
Even though he's killed people before that point, that's the point at which I think that, it's quite literally a different man who's going to be leaving that room.
Yeah. He would have shot her more than twice because he dry fires the last shot.
Yeah, the only reason he doesn't because he runs out of bullets, as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he turns his attention toward Hines, and his death scene is just wicked cool. He goes over to him, and he's pointing the gun at him. And it's like Hines is so freaked out that he doesn't remember or didn't realize that it was empty, so it's effective. And he's like, hey, man, take the dildo. Put it in your mouth and suck on it like a lollipop. And he uses his knowledge of how when your back is against the wall, you desperately want to believe, like, Mr. Maybe they will. So he knows that Hines is going to fall into that, and he reluctantly complies. He puts it in his mouth, and Fletcher...
Wait, do it for your research. That moment being the thing that, he's like, all right, that's what sold me.
He appeals to that scientific heart.
It's so fucking crazy.
It's all in the name of posterity.
Yeah. So he puts it in his mouth. Fletcher flips the switch, turns the dial all the way up. His mouth clamps down over it. And he had described just this snot bubble as Hines was upset and pleading that kept kind of expanding, but it wouldn't pop. And it was sort of this moment of fascination. I've never seen that happen before. It's not popping. But it's awful in this moment because the snot bubble finally pops, and the rest of that sentence is so casual. And so does his eye. And because we just compared that basically to a snot bubble.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like, Stephen King, you son of a bitch.
You imagine it popping like a snot bubble.
Yeah.
And it's so effective, and I love it.
His cheeks go from white to pale gray to dark purple. Smoke pours out of his nose. Then his other eye pops out onto his cheek. His raw sockets are staring at Fletcher with surprise. How? And his cheek tears open or melts. Fletcher isn't sure which. Smoke starts coming out of the hole in his face. His mouth is now on fire with his tongue burning like a rug. Again, please stop describing horrible things in such a mundane, casual way because it makes it 1,000 times worse. And the moment he shuts that switch off, Hines' body just collapses onto the floor. And then you guys give us this amazing one-liner he delivers to the corpse.
No, I think you're gonna have to do that one, George. I don't remember.
I didn't write it down because I figured I would. I know how much you love the one-liners.
Nice save. No, he says, just a badass. He leans over to this very, very dead guy and says the exact words that Hines said to him right after he delivered the shock, which was, how do you describe it now while the experience is still fresh?
Fucking rules. Oh, God, I love it.
That's really cold.
It's so cool.
And I like that after that moment, he's like, I'll probably vomit over this in my brain later.
Yeah.
I'll let this hit me after.
And so, Simon, as you were describing earlier, he's out of bullets. This is where he makes his way to the door, still kind of having that hopeless feeling like you and I did for him. He got his revenge, and that's probably as good as it's going to get. The guards, how is he going to get out of this situation? He walks out. There's a dog that's sleeping. It gives him the most insincere, lazy kind of bark, and then goes back to sleep.
Yeah.
Good guard dog.
This platoon of soldiers I was expecting. It's just a dog that's asleep, wakes up, looks at him, and then goes back to sleep again.
This is the line that I did write down of soundproofing is the great triumph of dictatorship. I love that.
And he stoops down, he kisses the linoleum outside of the door in the hallway. What did you guys make of this? This was a very strange moment, because the reason he does it.
I get it. Like, he never thought he'd see another room the rest of his life. And this floor is a new floor, and it is the first step towards freedom.
Well, and that part makes sense, but how it's tied to his sister?
I didn't quite understand.
Me neither. Okay, me neither.
I assumed that the thing with his sister is that he gets to continue. I think that the fact that he's not done avenging his sister because he lived getting out of this room. I think it's I'm out and I'm not forgetting why I worked so hard to survive.
Okay, that makes sense. I was a little confused because it's like, oh, he's
it's worded
he's
strange.
like, oh, it's the same color. The linoleum is the last thing his sister had worn, or something, like the last photo he had of her. And I was like, are you saying goodbye to your sister? Like, what? I didn't quite. No, it was interesting. No, thank you. So this is kind of where I wanted to ask you guys that question we kind of touched on earlier. He's now making his way up the stairs, knowing he'll probably die. And the last sentence in this paragraph is that he goes up the stairs. I was really surprised that it didn't end here, because it is such a King ending. And I would have accepted that and would have been like, and we'll never know. King's note at the end, as I mentioned earlier, said that it's a Kafka-esque story, but optimistic. So I wanted to ask you guys about this. I don't know if this quite works from the perspective that it's written from, but when I read it, I was toying with the idea that this last part was possibly a description of Fletcher's dying fantasy, or it was just another dude. And I only was kind of leaning toward it being ambiguous, because we're not with Fletcher now in this description. We've switched perspectives. We're with the newsstand guy. So to switch character perspectives and only do it here for this part, I feel like dances a very delicate line between optimistic and hopeless, which I appreciated, because I think you could say, no, definitively, like, he saw and this happened, but you could also, I think, argue that it is ambiguous and we can decide ourselves if he made it out. What do you guys do? Do you kind of, one of you want to describe just what this last scene was, and then we can talk about what you guys thought?
Yeah, as you say, it's from the point of view of the newsstand vendor, and he sees this guy coming towards him, and he's convinced he's going to rob him. He just has that look in his eye. Oh, Christ. Oh, and he puts his hand into the pocket, and oh, here comes the gun. And he doesn't produce a gun. He gets a wallet. It's a very specific brand of wallet, isn't it? That's described, I think.
It's like that hyper description from the newsstand guy, because he's freaked out.
Yeah. Yeah, it has that sort of, heightened sense of the visual, I suppose. So he gets his $10 note, buys a packet of Marlboro Reds. Is it Marlboro Reds? Yeah. That's the brand, isn't it? Yeah. I always used to go for Marlboro Gold myself. They're not as heavy as Marlboro Red. But anyway, buys a cigarette, takes one out, and tells the vendor he can keep the change. Takes one cigarette out, lights it, and then throws the rest of the pack in the trash can, which is next to the stand. I am embarrassed to admit this, but it's true, as people who know me will testify. If I'd have seen that happen, the second our man walks away, I'd have been into that.
I don't think you're alone there.
Who throws cigarettes?
That's expensive.
Yeah. Shit, I just have friends that smoke. I'd grab it for them.
It's a bad habit. But anyway, it had never occurred to me that it could be a kind of fantasy in Fletcher's mind. But that is a completely legitimate take on it. I mean, I just read it that it had happened, but there's no reason that it can't be something that's just going on in his head.
Okay, so we got two perspectives, Josh. Where do you land?
I think that because of the change of narrator sends the strong signal that the intent is that it's real, but I do like the ambiguity of, because it's also a very specific dream/goal that could belong to 100 people, this it really could be just anybody. But I think that the true intent is that it's Fletcher being safe. But definitely, I like that he is, because it's a month later, which either means that tells me it's been a month and this is him just getting back to the country. So he's been surviving for a month, because he's described as very thin
looking
and
rough.
sickly. And, so I love the idea that we don't get what this survival adventure was for the past month, but that we do find out, even though it wasn't an easy road, he did get home. And there's a sense of peace in that. And I really like that to the ending.
It's such a symbolic thing for him to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
To have this one cigarette, and that's all he needs. And like you, I kind of read that as the sort of the first signal of safety for him. Now I'm home. I know I'm safe. And this is the one thing I promised myself I would do once I got home and relax.
I like to imagine he, and less than an hour ago, he got off a shipping boat on a dock and has been walking through the streets of New York to a friend's place, or like someplace familiar where he can get to. And this is his first stop on the way. That's how I like to see the ending.
I think you guys are right, because King's intent obviously does seem to be that, because of his comment about how he wanted to give it this optimistic sort of edge. I guess I'm just super metal.
Shall we rate the story? 1 to 5 blue chambray shirts. Sam, would you like to go first?
Sure. Stephen King short stories, always amazing. You can't go wrong. This one, as I said earlier, wasn't even one that that genre I'm not immediately drawn to, but all of the literary themes just really caught my heart, and I loved this. I thought it was amazing, and I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 blue chambray shirts.
Terrific.
5, a full on 5.
Yeah. For me, this one, I love King short stories, but for this one, the characters really took it to a whole nother level. This story could be a really good story with flat one-dimensional characters, because it's still the story of it's so good. But the fact that in this short of a story, every character gets at least a small detail that you can kind of extrapolate their piece of this puzzle in this much, much bigger story. And I just, something about that, I really, really love it. I'm going 5 out of 5 blue chambray shirts. Simon?
Wow.
No pressure.
Okay.
Hey man, it's your rating. It can be whatever you want it to be.
I think I completely agree with you, Josh, in that the details that you get for each one of the characters strangely somehow just fleshes them out, even though all you've got is this detail. And it reminds me of something Frank Darabont said about Stephen King. I think when he was directing Shawshank, he said Stephen King has this real knack for character.
Yeah,
it's a very difficult thing to achieve, but eventually I think it becomes second nature. It's a knack. It's not something that's a trick. It's something that's a little detailed, but it gives you a lot in a little. And I think this particular story does that a lot. There's a lot in a little. It's very dense. It's like watching a really good TV drama, and you think you've watched a feature film, and it's been like 45 minutes of television. Wow, how did they get that into that? Like, wow, that's dense writing. That's really good. So yeah, I wanted more. I mean, that's a sign of a good piece of art, isn't it? It's like, I didn't want that to end. I wanted more. So I think overall I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 chambray shirts.
Fantastic.
Just because I wanted another, maybe the same again.
So before we get out of here, Simon, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to work your schedule from across the ocean to come here and be with us. We really appreciate it. We love you guys over at Kingsize. For our listeners who may have not listened to your show before, would you like to share a little bit about what you guys do?
Well, in no particular order, just more whim than anything else. We're making our way through a number of novels and short stories. We also have the Survivor type, which Matt has established, where we invite various King fans on to talk about which books they would bring to a desert island, which luxury items they would include, and heaven forfend, which ones they would throw on the fire. And if you, like me and at least one other member of Derry Public Radio, want to refuse to throw one on the fire, then I invite you to tell Matt that that's exactly what you would do.
You're really going to pile it on for Matt, aren't you?
Yeah, I love how this has become about really sticking it to Matt. I have to say, too, for our listeners, no, like, everybody's wonderful, but you guys are my favorite other Stephen
Well,
King
thank you very
podcast.
much.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So give
There you
them
go,
a
ladies
listen.
and gentlemen. $20 well spent.
So yes, please search Kingsize wherever you listen to podcasts and check them out. That's it for this episode of Derry Public Radio. As always, thank you for listening. Join us for our next episode. For CM Alexander and Simon Balcon, I'm Joshua Kahn reminding you, we're lucky to be alive. All of us. All of the time.
Hey everyone, CM Alexander here. Thank you for listening to In the Deathroom. We hope you enjoyed it. And thank you again to Simon from the Kingsize podcast. If you aren't listening to Simon and Matt, you really need to because they are awesome dudes. You can find a link to their podcast in our show notes. And check out their episode we were on because we had a ton of fun with them. For our next episode, we are back with our Patreon selection series where we'll be covering Dr. Sleep, a pick by Lisa Daly, and we'll be reading through Chapter 5. If you don't know what I'm talking about, visit our Patreon page for tons of perks for each of our tiered rewards, one of which being that you get to pick our next book. That's at the $50 and up tier. And if you've been following us a while, you know that depending on the size of the book you pick, $50 gets you quite a few episodes, including a movie adaptation if there is one. We are so grateful for all of your support, and we're really excited to see which book you'd like us to cover next. As always, you can follow us on all the things. You know what they are. And rather than bore you with those details again, I'll just reiterate, check out our friends at Kingsize. That's all for now, listeners. Goodbye.